It's absolutely brilliant to be here. I have planned to do this for ages. I've promised 1 million people that I'd do this talk for a long time, but life got in the way. I had my knee operation. The World Cup was on, so tonight we picked the first time that there hasn't been a football match in a couple of weeks. But it is absolutely fantastic to be here, and it's great to see so many people as well. There's loads of names, everybody I recognise. I won't call you all out because I don't get upset by not mentioning somebody. There's too many people to mention, but it's really, really good to see you all, and I am a little bit embarrassed about the attention. I'm not very good at that. So I'll just, before I share my screens, then I'll just talk about this talk and why I'm doing it and why I asked Tracy if I could do it. And it's because from the Open University and from a distance learning background, because it's not just the Open University, there might be people from other distance learning or non-traditional academic backgrounds. When I decided I wanted to do a PhD, I thought about how I go about it and realized I didn't have a clue. I didn't know anybody other than people who'd been tutors, but not friends. I didn't know anybody who'd been through the process. I didn't know anybody who could guide me. I didn't know anybody who could tell me the correct way to do it. I barely really knew what a PhD was. It was just, I want to do a PhD. So I needed to think about that and find more information about it. And I went through all that process, and I did get some support, and I did speak to people, and I found some information, but it very much felt like a really, really steep learning curve for me. And I thought, well, it shouldn't be like that. And I think if it's in comparison to somebody who goes in a traditional university, because academia is very traditional, it's linear, it expects people to do exactly the same thing, to all do an undergraduate, to all do a master's, to all do a PhD at about the same age, then do postdocs and just go on and then exactly the same thing as people did 40 years ago, just doing the same thing. So if you're doing it in a different way, people don't really know how to handle it or don't know how to help and support you. And if you're doing your education in a different way, so through distance learning or through the Open University, the information that you might get in a traditional university or in person as a traditional student just doesn't exist. And I've spoke to academics when I've done interviews in for PhDs, and I said, oh, it's a little bit Donald Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know when you're trying to do it. And they're, oh, no, don't worry, you've got nothing different. And then you go through the process, you're like, of course they would know this, because if a student was going in a traditional path at 20, 21 years old, they would have a personal tutor who would help them and look through their applications. They would say, oh yeah, I did my PhD here, or I know that person, which is just something that a non-traditional student doesn't have. So even academia isn't aware of the shortfalls of its pathway to attract people from different backgrounds. So I was really keen to share my experiences, and I wanted to share them. But I think it's important to say that they are my experiences. So, a good scientist should never plan everything on a case study of one. So please take everything I say with a pinch of salt. It may be different if you got on the same pathway, but at least it gives you an idea of what I've been through, I hope, and could explain it. So I shall just share my screen now before Tracy tells me off for not doing that. There we go. My screen should be up now. So today's talk, how to get a PhD place, an idiot's guide. I was very careful not to say how to get a PhD because I'm a very long way from getting one of them, but I did get a PhD place. So to start off then, I shall do a bit of self-PR. There we go. This is me. Tracy's told me I need to change my picture because it's on my Twitter and my LinkedIn and everything. So I'm going to have a new picture somewhere. I've had a lot of big dinners, so probably look a bit different as well. So me, I am the idiot in the talk, the idiot's guide. I am the idiot. My children call me Schrodinger's idiot because I can both forget where I live and do something really clever. So I'm originally from Manchester and I live in Stafford now. And that was my last base when I was in the armed forces. And I say for now because where my PhD is in Manchester, so I'm likely moving back, and I'll talk a little about that later. But I was in the armed forces, and I did my Open University study while I was in the army. And I had a pretty troubled background and a pretty bad upbringing, and I left school at 15 with no education. Well, I'd had an education, but I had no GCSEs, I had no qualifications, I had nothing to show for it. And it was never thought that I would either go to college and do anything, never mind A levels. There was no way I could support myself and go and study. So it was all very much go straight to work. There was the idea of going to university was never in my head, never anything I was going to do. And I ended up in the army. I had to get an exemption in the army to do the trade I did because I got well on the aptitude test, but I didn't have any qualifications. So luckily somebody made a case for me. So I was in the army, and while I was studying, and we'll talk about the timelines of the study in a bit, I did my OU study, and I did my physics degree, which I graduated in 2019, and I did a postgraduate certificate of space science, which I finished in 2020, and that was where the idea started forming actually for this what was Space Club and then the Space Society across that time. And then I left in September 2021 and did a full-time master's in astrophysics, but distance learning again with Liverpool John Moores. So all my education was distance learning. The first day I stepped foot into a university campus as a student at that university was the first day of my PhD, which again was a pretty strange experience. But I have achieved a PhD, or achieved a PhD place, and I'm doing it in Manchester in aerospace engineering. And I'm doing the development of telecommunications constellations, so things like Starlink, and I'm working out the best way to do them, and also the impacts on astronomy and space security and all that kind of stuff. And I got that place as a postgraduate research teaching associate scholarship. So I do research, but I also do some teaching on the side because I'm still in my first year. I'm only a few months in. It's low-level teaching, but that's going to develop over the course. And we're project supervising and stuff. So a good development opportunity there. It's a special scholarship, and I'll talk about scholarships later. But I also do teaching with the Open University now, so I'm associate lecturer. And I know some people on the chat are on these courses now, so thank you very much for coming. I did do a bit of self-publicity and put it on the forums. So I started teaching SM123 Physics and Space, the first year physics course last year. So I started doing that with only an undergraduate degree. And then this year I started doing S284 astronomy as well, the second year astronomy course, and that was after I'd finished my master's. So to give you an idea, if you ever want to be an Open University lecturer, that's the kind of education you need to then be able to teach at the different levels. And my interest then, so I love exoplanets. It was really interesting. We'll talk about that as well when we talk about my record. So when I did my final project in my undergraduate, I did a topic on exomoons. I looked at that. And then my master's topic was on citizen science, about how we use the Vera Rubin observatory, which is going to generate a ridiculous amount of data every night, how we process that data. And I wrote some code and used for citizen science. So school children could analyze the light curves of transiting exoplanets and then categorize them. So a bit like Galaxy Zoo, if you've ever seen something like that. But I'm interested in the space environment sustainability, so collisions, how we look after space, how we clean space, and also the politics and space policy. And because I was in the military, space security is important to me. So it's all about space for me. I'm all about space. If you're here because you're not about space, you're just thinking about journey PhDs, this is all for you as well. But I do apologize if I do keep talking about space. It's just because it's what I work in space. This is not space. This is my front room. But there we go. So that's me, the idiot. I'm already 10 minutes in, so I best get my finger out. So I think Tracy says we'll ask questions at the end, and you put them in the chat. If there are anything burning and Tracy wants to pop in and shout and ask me, jobs are good and we'll do that. But if not, there'll be a period at the end to ask questions. And what I'm going to cover today is, what is a PhD? You know, I'd want to do a PhD. Well, what is it? What does that mean? And then whether you actually need one, because that is a good question and something that's probably more pertinent to an older or more mature student. Do you need a PhD? Is it worth the effort? Then I'll talk about the academic profile types that you potentially need to apply to get on it, because ultimately there are standards to be able to get onto the course, but they may not be what you think. And then we'll do quite a bit on finding a PhD, because I think the research and the targeting what you want to do and how you apply is the key point, even more than the actual application process itself. If you prepared yourself, you hopefully will be more successful later. And then I'll go on to the application process, and then we'll finish with choosing, because you're all going to be successful. Everyone that wants to do it is going to get to exactly where they want. They're going to use all the great advice that I'll give you today, and they're going to get it. And you're going to say, oh, I've got so many, which one do I want to do? So let's move on. What is a PhD? And I got given this myself as a new PhD student not so long ago, and I thought it was really good. So there's no such thing as plagiarism, only known theory. I've clearly robbed it. And there's a chap called Mike who's got a book, an illustrated guide to a PhD, and this comes from him. So this circle, imagine this circle is the entirety of human knowledge. It's everything that humanity has discovered over the entire time of civilization. And that little dot in the middle is everything you knew when you finished junior school, your good education, and you knew a small portion of all the knowledge that humanity has. And then you went to high school and you learned a bit more, and it's all circle because you learn lots about different subjects, a bit of maths, a bit of English, a bit of philosophy, a bit of chemistry, a bit of whatever. So it's all very circular. There's no specialism. It's a general education. And then you finish high school and you go and do your degree. You go and do your undergraduate degree with the Open University or wherever you do, a BSc, a BA. And that's a lot of general information as well, but there's a little bump there. And that bump is the specialist knowledge you're going to get in your physics, your engineering, your chemistry, your psychology, your philosophy, whatever the subject is. You've now got a bump, and the bump is your specialism. But really, an undergraduate degree is a foundation degree. It's a start point. So your bump isn't massive, but you do have a specialization there. And once you've done that degree, you might go on to a master's, and a master's is very much focused on a topic, and this now specializes. You become quite in depth in that particular topic, and you're focusing. And then you finish your master's, and you might start a PhD. And a PhD is about research. And the first thing you do in research is understand what the current state of science is, or the current state of the body of knowledge. And that's like a literature search, that's reading academic papers, reading journals, going to talks and conferences. And over time that builds up until you're all the way at the very edge of human knowledge in your topic. And that's and you've got you will effectively be an expert in that field. You'll have got to the edge as a PhD researcher. So now it's time to focus. And you're at the edge and you're pushing and you're doing your research and you're studying and you're thinking of new ideas and you're doing experiments or you're developing new things, and you'll push and you'll push and you'll push. And then over time, whoop, a little bump comes out. And this is outside the normal sphere of human knowledge. This is new knowledge. And that's your PhD. So the whole point of a PhD is to generate some new, unique knowledge that nobody knows. And it might be small, but new. It might be huge and earth-shattering, but new. The important thing is it's new. So a PhD is creating new knowledge. But over the time, you've spent so much study that your views changed. So you're now in this little bump, and that is your world, and you know everything about it. And you are the world expert. At the end of a PhD, nobody else knows more about your subject than you do. You are a world expert. But you've got to have a bit of perspective. That little bump is still a little bump. You're one little corner on the edge of human knowledge, and every PhD researcher is pushing out on that bump and making the human knowledge, the circle, just a little bit bigger. And the important thing is that everybody keeps pushing, and we all learn more things. So that's what a PhD is. And if that's for you, you want to push at the edge of human knowledge, then it absolutely is. You can do it just as I am hopefully trying to do. But why? Why should you get a PhD? And like I said earlier on, I thought I want to do a PhD. And the reason I actually wanted to do it initially was because I wanted to challenge myself, and I'm stubborn, and I feel like because of my background and because of my life, I've had to push hard against a lot of closed doors. And I think I want to go as far as I can. I want to prove that I can do things. And that's a good motivation tool in itself. But the question was asked to me during the application process: Do you need a PhD? And people have reasons for them. They say the career development. So some careers you go in, you might have to have a PhD. You cannot be an academic at a certain level or work at in a certain department at NASA. Whatever your dream is, without a PhD, it might be a mandatory requirement, or it might just be, I put personnel there, I can't even spell, personal development. So for your development, you might not need it, but it might help you progress within your current field. You might not be career changing, or it might just be your passion. You might absolutely love this subject, and this is exactly what you want to do. And we'll talk about that again in a minute, about the focus of a PhD and whether it is actually what you love, because it can be a difficult balance. But you need to understand that there's a commitment involved in it. That time, it is 3.5 years or even longer if you're doing it on different schedules, or part-time, could be 7-8 years. It is a huge commitment in your time. It is a commitment in money. Not only have you got to pay for a PhD, if and I'll talk about finance, but it costs you money. It might cost you money indirectly by you not being able to work a job that you're already doing, so you have to live on reduced income. As a mature student or somebody with life and commitments and family, that might be a much bigger consideration than it would be for a 21-year-old with no commitments. And then, is it the subject for you? Can you get a PhD in what you want to do? Because it's a long 3.5 years if it's not what you want to do. So do you need a PhD? And I'd reiterate, do you need a PhD? If you're a mature student, if you've been through different places and you've got different jobs, maybe you have the skills to get where you want to go. And that was a question that was asked to me. I was speaking to a senior person in DSTL, the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, and they do a lot of, in fact, they're involved in a little bit with the Virgin Orbit that's launching. And he was like, Ian, you haven't got the PhD, but you've got a background in project management. Maybe you could enter at a different level and work your way up to where you want to go. And it was a real consideration about, I want to work in the space industry. Do I need a PhD? And actually, for me, the answer, because of my military experience, was maybe not. Maybe I could get a job, but it wouldn't be the job I wanted to be. I wouldn't be in the right position I want to be. So I needed to understand my own motivations and make sure it was exactly what I wanted. And if this is the path you want to go down, I'd really drill into why and what you want to do, because you will get asked that in the interviews. So, academic profile, the first thing I'll talk about then. What grades do you need? Because most people who are watching now are doing study at whatever level. They might be coming to the end of the degree, they might be very early in the degree, but ultimately you need to know what grades you need to achieve to be able to get it. And there is a line. There is a line. The problem I find, and why I've included this in, and I'm going to show you my academic record in a minute, is what you always see on social media is people's wins. Nobody posts when they fail, do they? And social media is terrible. And I think one thing is opportunity. You want the opportunity to go and do something, but you also need the aspiration to go and do something, because you need to know it's for you. You need to know it's something you're capable of. And I think it took me a long time to aspire to go and do that, because you see people, you think, Tracy was talking about imposter syndrome, maybe not imposter syndrome, but you don't see anybody like you, or you don't think you can achieve them things because you haven't got a record of achieving them things. So social media is terrible for that, and I'm just as bad for it. There's a post to my tweet when I finished my masters with Liverpool John Moores, and I did get a distinction. I did really well, so clearly I was proud of it. And then I went and farmed likes and clicks on Twitter and said, "Oh, aren't I clever in my fairy underpants? I'm a master of the universe," and that's brilliant. And that might be, that one moment when I had a success and I showed I've done really well. But behind that success is a lot of things you won't see, and that's why I'll show my academic record now. I'm just gonna have a drink. One moment. So this is a screenshot, a direct extract of my Open University student home. You've all got a student home, and it says what course modules you've done. This is mine. The reason I've done it is not to say, look at me, aren't I cherry potato, I've been successful. It's exactly the opposite. That is not a distinguished record. It's a good record, but it's not a distinguished record. So, as I said, I did the Honours in Natural Science Q64, which is still available and people do. Because of the time I did it, some of the courses have changed. So I've kind of updated here to say these are the courses that it would be today. So if you're looking at the pathway I took, this is what the equivalent would be. The few things that are different is there was 3 10-credit modules I took, but that's the equivalent of SM123. Some of the modules are exactly the same as I took now. A lot of them have changed over time because it took me quite a while to get it. And I'd look at my grades, I think, is an important thing to look at. So firstly, the grade of my degree, I got an upper second class. I got a 2-1. I didn't get a first. I never set the world on fire. I was not the best student who got a degree at the Open University, because I didn't need to be, and because life got in the way, and because I was doing it distance learning, and because I had a family, and because sometimes I just couldn't be bothered. So I got a 2-1, but it got me to where I want to be. So, you don't have to be perfect. And I've put the OU grade boundaries and what they're on there, and I've highlighted 2 particular grades I got. And in the second year practical science, which some of you may be doing or plan to do, I got a grade 3 pass, which is the equivalent of a 2-2 in the degree level, and I got 58%. So I only just got a grade 3 pass. So why did I get that? I didn't really enjoy the course. I didn't get on with my tutor. I had a family issue that happened at the time, so I missed TMAs out. I just got through the course, and good enough was good enough. And it hasn't affected my life. It hasn't changed anything. So if you get a lower pass, well, it's not the end of the world. I also got a grade 3 pass in quantum mechanics, and I got that because quantum mechanics is nails. I was sat in an exam for 3 hours thinking my world was falling apart, and at the end of it, I was just hoping I'd passed. But I had passed, and I got a good enough pass, and I moved on. And nobody's ever come back and said, Ian, I think you're a good egg, but you're really crap at quantum mechanics, because it just doesn't matter. Ultimately, the key thing is, did I meet the overall grade that I needed to get onto my course, my follow-on education? And I did. I got an upper second class. So that is my actual record. That is what I did. So if you ever struggle with a course, if you ever don't get the grade you want, well, don't worry about it. There's other opportunities. The ones I'll also say, there's 3 distinctions on there, but one of them is just a 10-point course. The 2 distinctions at the top, the astrophysics one and the science project course, where I did a study of exoplanets, basically means the only thing I put any effort into and actually tried to do the best thing was my astrophysics one. I did my 2 astrophysics modules, and I did really well, because sometimes you're studying a subject that just doesn't interest you, and it's a means to the end to get on. I found the electromagnetism course really difficult because the texts were just a little bit boring. So I struggled to get through it, because you're not interested in everything. But this was my broad brush physics degree that was IOP accredited and would hopefully give me a framework of information and knowledge to go on. And I did all right. I didn't do brilliantly. I did all right. But my first course that I passed was in 2004, and my second course I passed was in 2011. What happened? What happened in that intervening years? Well, let's have a look. So there's another profile in your OU student home that says other modules, and they're all the things that you've either done that aren't part of a qualification, or most likely that you've done, failed, that you didn't register for complete, whatever the situation was. And that was exactly the case for me. So I actually started studying with the OU in 2002. And I was a young soldier. I had 2 kids at that time, and I thought, I'm a stick as a breeze block. Best get some education. So I started with the first Open University course, Discovering Science, in 2002. Nope, I found it nails. I had loads going on in my life. I couldn't keep up with the work. I couldn't focus. The workload was something I just wasn't used to studying. My skills weren't very good, and I ended up withdrawing from the course. Uh, couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. I also really struggled with the mathematics. So 2003, I thought I'll do the introductory mathematics course. That's a good idea. It's only 30 credits as well, half the workload. Best crack on with that. Nope, still couldn't do it. 2003, in fact, 2003, I was a soldier. I went to Iraq. Life got in the way. Wife was saying, why are you sat in the dining room when you're home? You've just been to Iraq, you're coming home and now you want to study. Well, that's not going to happen. So didn't finish that. Couldn't do that either. And then I thought, I'll tell you what, I can't do 30 credits. I'll do 10 credits. And I love space. So they had a 10-point introductory astronomy course. I'll definitely do that. The way this course worked was, I think you studied it over 12 weeks and you could submit your assignment, or you could defer your assignment for a further 5 months. So I didn't do the first one. That's why it's postponed. And then I didn't do the second one either. Life got in the way. Couldn't finish it. Wasn't focused on studies. Fail. So I didn't pass that course either. So I've been at it for 2 years now. I've done nothing. What I did do then is try S103 again, and I did make it through. It was a real struggle, but I did complete a course. Yay! So 2.5 years in, I managed to complete my first OU course. Job's good. I thought, I'm a smart cookie now. I finished a course. I'm going to do second year astronomy. Now I'm ready for space. Nah, couldn't do it. Too much to do. 2005. Couldn't concentrate on the study. Couldn't understand a lot of the stuff. I didn't have the maths foundation, and I really struggled. So what shall I do? I'll take a step back. I'll do the maths. And there was also associated residential course for the first year course I did. I'll take a step back. I'll do both of them in 2005. Nope, still failed. Still couldn't finish them. Still didn't have the time. Still didn't have the commitment, to be honest. I wouldn't schedule enough time for study because I was a young lad and I wanted to go out as well. So, 3 times a balance. So 2005, didn't do it. Had a break, thought this isn't for me. I'll go away. In 2008, I come back and thought I'll have another go. Still didn't do it. Still couldn't pass. So I've been at it for 6 years at this point, and I still haven't passed a course. Well, I've already passed one course. I still haven't actually made any progress. And I thought, I can't do this maths and physics. It's too hard for me. But I like politics. I like the social sciences. So instead, I'm going to go and do a politics degree. And I signed up for the first course of the social sciences, and I didn't enjoy it. So I left that one as well, and I didn't finish it, and I'm just rubbish. So I'm now 8 years in. I've done one course. I don't feel like I'm a particularly good student or a particularly high achiever at this point. But in about 2011, I got my mojo. If you think back to my schedule, 2011 was when I passed a 10-point course. I needed that because I thought I need some maths for something else I was doing in the army. And then I actually passed another proper 30-point course or 60-point course in 2013. So it took me about a decade to get from starting with the OU to actually getting enough motivation, enough time, enough study skills, enough confidence, because I didn't believe I could do it, to go on. So if you ever think you're struggling, particularly if you're in the first year, I bet you don't struggle as long as me. 10 years, I had a hell of a time. Even when I got my mojo, even when I was passing courses, life still got in the way. I still had to defer things. My 2 astrophysics courses, I couldn't study 60 credits at a time. I kept trying to, and then life got in the way. So I dropped to 30, defer one, tried again the next year, dropped to 30, defer one. So even when you're successful, even if you're going through, don't be afraid to defer things. As long as you complete the qualification, it doesn't matter. So I told you that because I wanted to show a realistic pathway of what people or what somebody who's got onto a PhD place got. And it's important to say, and I'll talk about the pathways in a minute, I did get offered PhD spaces solely on my BSc, unconditional, with no need to get any master's degree or anything. So this catastrophe of education over the course of a decade and a half was enough to get me in a PhD place. So don't think you have to be a super mega genius with chips, because you don't. So what are the entry standards then? So depending on where you're going and depending on what you want to study, it changes. There is no standardization in academia. Some fields, it's routine for people to go on only with a bachelor's. Some universities, it's routine for people to be accepted only with a bachelor's. In other universities or in other fields, people are absolutely expected to have a master's. But even if that's true, even if it says on the website, you must have a master's to enter at this grade, they've got flexibility. It's not set in stone. I was speaking to somebody on one of the day schools for an OU course I did, and he was an academic, I think, in Newcastle or Northumberland, somewhere up there, somewhere near the wall with the White Walkers. And he said they had a student who they accepted for a PhD who got a 3rd in their degree because he was just utterly atrocious at passing exams. He was a brilliant researcher. He was very clever. He just couldn't pass exams. So he got on it with that dispensation because they knew he was a good person. The problem we've got as more mature students or distance learning students is we don't have that individual knowledge with the academics who are doing it. We're meeting them probably for the first time. And I found this at Manchester in my own PhD. A large proportion of people who are doing a PhD at Manchester are actually did their undergraduate or did a master's in Manchester. So they already knew the academics, so they had a foot in. So again, it's another challenge for us, but it's not set in stone. There is flexibility, and don't close doors on yourself. Make somebody else close doors on you, and keep kicking them. So possible routes then. So a bachelor's, you can get in with a bachelor's. I did get offered with just a bachelor's with no with unconditional offer. It's likely you'll probably need a 2-1 or higher, but again, like I said, there's opportunities. Bachelor's 360 undergraduate credits, probably the last 30 or 60, depending on what course or pathway you go on, will be the research project. And that's probably the most important part of your degree, because one of the things you'll have to show is that you understand research, or you've got an aptitude to research, or even you just know what research is. And that's probably where the only chance you're going to demonstrate at an undergraduate in that final project. So that's a possible route. And absolutely people go, if somebody says you have to have a master's to get a PhD, they're wrong. You can get it with a BSc, and people do. The more traditional route, and again, this is engineering physics focused, so if you're listening and you're doing a different pathway, then it might be different for you. But normally in physics or engineering, the traditional pathway for your common or garden student who goes school, university, PhD, will have a Masters of Physics or a Masters of Engineering, an integrated Masters. And that's 480 credits. So the 4th year is the Masters year, but it's all graded effectively as undergraduate. So it comes with the same grading system. And again, you'd expect to have a 2-1 or higher. It'd be made up of 360 of a normal undergraduate degree, 120 of a postgraduate degree. The 4th year will normally include a 60 credit research project. And again, that's the bit you focus on. So when I did my OU study, they didn't have the integrated Masters of the physics route, integrated MPhys. So I didn't do it. I did a BSc and then did a master's elsewhere. But they do offer it now with the Open University, and that is the traditional route. So if you don't want to be on a different pathway, if you want to follow the traditional pathway that traditional students follow to a PhD, that is the pathway. You will be just in line with your peers of whatever age applying if you've done an MPhys. That's normally the case in physics, definitely in physics. But because they didn't have it for me, and for some people, they might have done a BSc a long time ago, I might be thinking of coming back to it. They might think, oh, I'll do some postgraduate study. A taught masters, so an MSc or an MA if you're doing the art side. And I think that's a mature student route, particularly in physics. It's quite rare. There aren't many standalone MScs because so many institutions do integrated masters. There isn't a demand for them. I found one in astronomy, in astrophysics. So Liverpool John Moores Astrophysics MSc by distance learning is the one I did, and that's 180 credits. So it's 60 credits more than you'd get at the 4th year of an MPhys. So it's more work, it's more effort, but it's also more knowledge and more information. So 120 credits would be taught, and 60 credits would be your project. And again, you'd expect to get a merit in that MSc. Most likely would be what they'd ask you for, and it includes a 60 credit postgraduate research. So if you look at that, that's more credits and more effort than the MPhys route as you go along, but it's a separate standalone masters. So that's why is the route I ended up doing. There's another way, which is a bachelor's and MPhil, so a master's of philosophy. And really an MPhil is the first year of a PhD. And so a lot of institutions don't even let you register for an MPhil. It's normally if you get a year in or a year and a half in and you're not progressing, instead of just leaving with nothing, you can submit what information you've got and go for a lower degree than a PhD. And it's 180 credits research normally. You might have some talk course in there, but it's normally a pure research degree. Some universities do let you register for an MPhil, and that could be a way for you to try out to see whether you like research. I'll sign up, I'll do a research master's, and at the end of it, if I like it, it's good. It might be a way for the university to get a look at you. We'll start at an MPhil and then see how you go on. What I spoke about a minute ago about sometimes academics don't know you. Well, it's a way for them to get to know you, and then you could likely make your master's project into a higher level project, to a PhD project. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and every single way is flexible. So engage with the institutions. If you aren't a perfect academic profile, engage with the institutions because they can be flexible. So now you've got the education, You need to go and find a PhD. And I'll not talk about this first bit, where in the world, because I only did mine in the UK and I don't have any experience abroad. And also, there'll be people who are international students and they'll be coming to the UK and I don't have the experience for them either. So I can't really tell you. The only things I do know is that if you're doing it internationally, if you're going abroad, so the United States, there's different timelines and they're set in stone. So you can almost apply up to the week before starting your PhD in the UK. If they've got a space, if they've got funding, you can get in. If you go into the US, a lot of it is quite rigid, and I think it's quite earlier in the year. I think it's September, October, November time. So if you want to go and do one in the US for next year, you've already missed the deadlines. So if you're going international and you want to go abroad, then you need to understand them. You need to understand visa requirements for going abroad and whether you get access. And again, for international students coming to the UK, I know visas are a real problem, particularly with getting people study getting delayed with it not coming through the Home Office. And then funding, it costs money, and you're probably not going to get UK funding and access if you're going abroad. And if you're an international student coming to the UK, it can be more challenging to get funding, and things cost more money. So these are all the things you need to think about, either going abroad or for somebody international coming to the UK. But what I will talk about is in the UK, because that's what I'm doing. And that's what I looked into. So the first and most important thing I thought in the PhD search was, where am I going in the UK? Where am I going? Because there's no point me saying I'm going to do a PhD in the Outer Hebrides if my family won't go to the Outer Hebrides, or if I can't commute there. So although I could look at every institution in the UK, a common or garden, what a 21-year-old student might be able to say, I can live anywhere, I've got no ties. A 40-year-old career changer, or somebody who's got children, or somebody who's got family or elderly relatives in the area, or is just settled in an area and doesn't want to move, can't go everywhere. So you need to consider where you're going to go. And if you can't move there, you need to consider if you can commute there. And the cost of commuting is expensive. So to give you a quick case on that, I'm in Manchester. I still live in Stafford. I decided it was worthwhile for me to commute. I would be able to commute to Manchester because it's in 1 hour on the train. Well, that's £400 a month on the train when the trains aren't on strike. And it's an hour each way on the train, but I've got to get to the train station and wait for it on both sides, and I've got to get back from my house. So it's like 3 hours out of my day, and the availability of the trains doesn't really match up. And at first I thought, oh, that's doable. But actually, it's quite a lot of time. And I found personally that it isn't sustainable having that much time. There's things happen in the university. I might need to get there early. There's things happening late I might want to stay for. It's difficult. So that's why I said on the first slide, for now, because I'm actually moving back to Manchester, because my plan for commutability didn't work, or is more difficult than it needs to be. It was affecting my research. So it's something you absolutely need to consider. If you were going to move somewhere, is it livable? Who wants to live in a hole in the ground because you can't afford anything? Is it you're only affording a rough area? Is there somewhere you don't want to live? I mean, I'd have loved to do a PhD at the Open University, and my wife should refuse to go to Milton Keynes. There is no way that woman was living near concrete cows. So there was no OU, and that was the end of it. And is it close to your family? And of course, as a professional northerner and a Mancunian, what type of sauce you put on your chips is pretty critical. So going back to Manchester, guaranteed that I can have gravy on my chips. And because, northerner, council estate teeth, I need to soften my food up. I can't have chips without sauce. It'll be too tough for me gum. So I couldn't go down south at all. So it's important what your location was. And once you've got your location, you'll have a list of universities you could go to. And that narrows it down for you. But then there's more questions. There's, what are your future goals? And when I said I wanted to do a PhD, I wanted to do something in space. And actually, the first thing I wanted to do was in astrophysics and astronomy, professional astronomer. What a great idea. I could be an astronomer all day. And as I found more about it, and as I started looking into it, I realized that actually the jobs as a professional astronomer after you finish your PhD, you get a PhD in astrophysics and study eclipsing binaries or the formation of galaxies or something wondrous. And then you'll finish your PhD and you won't get a job, or the chances of getting your job are really low. Or if you do get a job, it'll be a short 1 or 2 year contract expecting you to move all the time. And you'll probably do that for about 10 years. And maybe at the end of 10 years, could you get a fixed, steady, supported contract? Well, I'm 42. I'll be 46-ish when I finish. Do I want to be 56 and still in an uncertain job and moving around? And the answer was no. Or do I want to finish my PhD and then end up being a data scientist in the city doing finance? And the answer was no. So although I wanted to do astrophysics and it was a subject that really interested me, I decided it wasn't what I wanted to do my PhD in, because the next step just wasn't what I wanted, and the chances of doing it was quite low. it was difficult. And if I was 21, I might have gone into astrophysics. I might have done 10 years, and I might have spent my 30s then trying to work into a tenure position and all that kind of stuff. But your age matters. It does matter where you want to go, and you've got to make a decision what's best for your life. What subjects you're going to do matters. So I ended up saying the subjects I wanted to do was either space science or space engineering. And I'm from a physics background, not an engineering background. So that'd be a change. You don't have to stick in the same subject. But that was kind of where I wanted to go. And then I narrowed down the institutions that I could possibly go that was in my location list with where their expertise are, because there might be a university in an area that does nothing like I want to do. So there's not much point engaging with them. So you're narrowing down. And they'll have a focus on research. So even if they do the subject, it might not be in the area you're interested in. And then they might have a reputation, either a reputation academically or a professional reputation. You've heard bad things about people, or you've heard it's a bad location or a bad environment, and you think maybe it's not for me. And then there's the people that are there as well. Who are your potential supervisors? The community is really small. There's in most sciences, there's Twitter. You'll see people, you'll see talks. You'll have people invited to wonderful talks with the Space Society, and you might have seen and met people and think, oh yeah, you're a good egg, I think I could work with you, or oh my god, I think you'd be a nightmare. And that does judge on where you want to go. And at the end of all this searching, you might have a decision about, right, these are the universities I could go to, and these are the topics I'd like to do. So you've narrowed it down quite dramatically from just I want a PhD. And then you've got to think about how much it costs. So there are fees for a PhD, and I've put on there the full-time and part-time fees for the Open University, and they're very similar across the rest of the UK. It's about 4.5, 5 grand full-time and 15-ish for international students, and about half that part-time. But on top of that, you've got living costs. You've got to live wherever you live, or you've got to maintain your house, and you've got personal commitments that you need to pay for. You might need a car much more than somebody who's a traditional student would need. And you've got to do it for a long time. You're not going to finish your PhD before about 3.5 years full time. And if you're doing it part time, it could be up to 7, 8 years. This is all going to cost money, and it's difficult. And particularly if you're full time, you're probably giving up opportunities later. So if you're working full time as a mature student, it's highly likely you're going to be taking a pay cut to come and be a researcher. And is that something that's sustainable for a very long time? So it really does need to be considered. And how it's going to be paid for is important. And the way a lot of people do it outside of the sciences is self-funded. They pay for it themselves, and that's also common on part-time, from what I believe. I don't know, obviously I haven't applied for a part-time one. Is that people fund it themselves, so they're working and they do it part-time, a lot like your Open University studying now. And the Open University do part-time distance learning research degrees. So if this is where you want to go, there's a place. Keele do it. Liverpool John Moores will certainly consider it. Warwick did when I spoke to them. So there's a few places, if you want to do a part-time, you could do. The best thing about being self-funded is there's a good chance you're doing your own project. If you're paying for it, it doesn't cost a supervisor or anything. All they've got to do is supervise you, and as long as they've got the knowledge, they can. So maybe you can do something that absolutely matches your interest. It's your project. But in a lot of other subjects outside the sciences, or things that are deemed to be valuable in society, I don't agree with that, but what society does deem as valuable, there is no funding. If you want to study the styles of shoes in medieval Belgium, there's probably nobody's going to pay you for that. So you've got to pay for it yourself. So in the arts, particularly, there's a lot of self-funding. And then if you're doing it full time, it's limited how much work you can do on top. And part of the PhD contract is often a limit on how many hours you can work, whether that's externally, although how they're going to police that, I don't know, but it's going to affect your day if you're out, you were doing a shift in Tesco's all night. But there's GTA work, which is a graduate teaching assistant, so helping with labs, supporting students, things like that. So you can get paid a little bit there. But there's also a UK doctoral loan. So if you're a UK student, and actually I was looking at this, I think this is focused on England, although England and Wales, but I think there's a Scottish version as well. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely for England. You could get a doctoral loan, which is similar to undergraduate or postgraduate loan, but it's only just under 28 grand. So over 4 years or 8 years part-time, it'll probably pay your fees and not much else. So that's not going to support you full-time as a PhD student. So you've got to think how you're going to survive is important. So you're looking for projects. Some projects, the Holy Grail, have guaranteed funding. You'll see a project advertised and it says funded. So you don't have to worry about money. If you get the place, you get the funding, jobs are good and you're on. But it's probably not your project. It's funded because the supervisor, has engaged with somebody else, an industry or the research council or a government, or even from their own research budget. And this is a project they want to do. They just want somebody to do it. Does it suit you? And it's important to make sure that it does suit you. And it might, I applied for some funded projects that I thought, yep, that'd be right up my strata. But it might not. It's a long time to commit to do somebody else's very, very niche work. So it's something you need to understand. You probably get funded at the UKRI level, the Research Council, and currently there was a 10% increase because there was protests against them not giving an inflation matching pay rise. So the rate as of now is £17,668 per year. You don't pay tax and national insurance on that, and it doesn't affect your personal tax allowance. So if you earn money on top, then that's tax-free up until your personal allowance as well, which is 12,000. So I'm not a tax man, I don't know. But the most important thing is you'll get about £1,470 tax-free in your bank every month. And some particular guaranteed funding are higher. So some industry, Airbus will sponsor some, different people in industry will sponsor through universities, and some of them are higher, because effectively you're doing their research for them. So them as a business, as an organization, you're doing their research. So the holy grail, guaranteed funding, jobs are fish. Competition funded. There was two types of competition funded I found. One was project focused. So it's a competition funded project, and they're offering the project before they know they've got funding from whichever council. And you could be the best person in the world. You could be the world's answer to the new Albert Einstein. And they could say, yep, you can do a PhD. You're absolutely the person we want. And in you come. And then at the last minute, they don't get funding because the project doesn't get funded. So you don't get funded. So you don't get paid. So you can't do the project. So it's one to be aware of. The other way I found was competition funded, but on the candidate. So this is very common. A lot of institutions expect to get some funding, and every year they'll know, I don't know, they might get 6, 7, 8 projects worth of funding, or 8 people's worth of project funding. And the supervisors will put out their projects and people will apply, and then they'll do a ranked list, and they might have 5 people going for a project, and they might say, yep, all 5 of them could do this PhD, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we've got enough people for 2, so we'll offer number 1 and 2. Number 1 says yes, number 2 says no, so we offer number 3. And if you're number 4 or 5, you might not be getting it, even if you're available to it. They said you could do it, so it can be difficult, and it can delay as well, because if you are 3 or 4, everybody will apply for multiple PhDs. Not many people will put their eggs in one basket, so people will then reject them. So even being 3 or 4 might not be a problem. You might get an offer. It just might take time. You've got to wait for somebody to reject it, and the timelines aren't the same. I know in the US, everybody gets offered on the same day, and then they've got like a certain period to reject. Not in the UK, you can get offered months before somebody else, and you've got to make a decision. So it's understanding how that works. And then the last way, which is I was lucky enough to for the project I ended up doing, was a scholarship. And I was lucky as well that it was for lucky. Is it lucky? I'd applied. I spoke to the supervisors. I defined my own project and then got a scholarship to fund my project. So it's a bit like the unfunded one where you get to do what you want to do, but I've got somebody else to pay for it. It's difficult. It's rare. It's competitive. But they can be good. And then they'll have different criteria. So there might be some that are UK students only. There might be some that are focused to particular minorities. Countries support them. So if you're an international student listening, India, Pakistan, China, all these have national scholarships. There'll be different ones on the university. Different universities have different things, president scholarships, loads of different ways, but they can take time. And you might apply for your PhD, get told you could do a PhD here and we would accept you, but there's no funding, so you need to go and sort it out somewhere else. So it's a bit of a lottery. What's likely going to happen, and what's happened to me, was it was a mix. I applied for different ones, and then when I got offered the projects I got offered, they had different funding streams, and that kind of tipped where I wanted to go. But there's lots of different ways of getting funding. And then how do you find a PhD? You know where you want to go, you know what you want to do, you've got ideas about how you're going to pay for it. How do you find that PhD? So there's findaphd.com, and this is a screenshot of it. And this is a repository where universities can post their PhDs. They are international, but there's a lot of UK ones on there. It's very UK focused. And you split it by subject, you do a search. So this was one I screenshotted on Sunday afternoon in Birmingham. It was very similar to one I did apply for as well. And you'll see on the bottom there, funded PhD project students worthwhile worldwide. So effectively, this is in space weather, understanding how communications go across the globe through the atmosphere. They'll pay you to come and do it, and you'll go to Birmingham or Russell Group University. It's a pretty good PhD, I think. So you can find stuff like this. What's important to note on there is to look in different organizations or different departments. So if you want to do a physics PhD, don't just look in the physics department. If you want to do a space PhD, don't just look in the space engineering department. This is the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering. It's separate. If you wanted to do a space weather at Oxford, it's actually, and I think it's the Atmosphere and Oceanic department. So look outside what you'd expect. My PhD, I ended up doing a space-based PhD, and it's in the Department of Mechanical, Aerospace and Civil Engineering. So there's lots of people building bridges and buildings. Nothing I know anything about. And it's not comprehensive, so nobody has to put their project on there, but they can. And it's a really good starting point. The next way is institutions themselves. This is Warwick. This is a real project that's up there now, fully funded for 3.5 years. A really good project about gravitational wave, following up gravitational waves. This isn't on Find a PhD. This is only on the Warwick website. Because I went through the process with Warwick, most of the projects don't end up on Find a PhD. It's only if they go a very long time without filling it, they then put it up there. So if you go into an institution, you might see a notification. It might be there for a long time before it goes on Find a PhD. You get in there first. Most of these PhDs are actually, they don't have fixed deadlines. They have find the right person and fill it. So if you get in there early and it never gets published broadly, you've got the PhD. You know, you're killing the competition. And again, check across the departments. And in some cases, and I found this, I spoke to an academic that I'd been tweeting to, and I said, "Oh, have you got time for a chat?" And we had a call, and we were talking about the PhD process. He went, "Oh, I forgot to put my projects in the list." So it would have never been advertised if I hadn't spoke to him before. So if you find an academic that does what you want to do or goes in the area and field, he could be your supervisor, or he or she could be your supervisor, then speak to them, because sometimes they just forget. I've seen an academic's inbox. Some of them have got thousands of emails. It's just hard work to get to the top of it. And then the other way I found was professional jobs and professional notice boards. So there's a link there to the AAS, which is the top, which is all about actual jobs, how to be a professor of Wiggly amps and flux capacitors in California. But if you scroll down, it does talk about graduate positions and pre-doctoral. So their stuff is advertising there, particularly international ones, actually. And then there's groups in the UK, informal groups. So at the bottom there is UK Planetary Forum. I don't know if Guy's on. He loves astrobiology and it's right up his street. That'd be a good place for him to look. But they push out opportunities and just stuff that's in planetary science, in astrobiology, and looking at the moons of Saturn, all that kind of stuff. And these are just where they're advertised sometimes. And then you can look through societies. So the Royal Astronomical Society has some information, Institute of Physics, the Aeronautical Society. Industry sometimes advertise it. They say, we'll fund this researcher, and you can even say, will you fund it at the university? And they will. They might have a list of them. And sometimes government do it. So the one I was going to do at Birmingham was government funded because it had links to defence, defence fund things. And although I wouldn't have been working on a defence project, the physics principles would have been the same. So there's lots of different routes, and you've got to go and find it. And that's it. You've done all this searching. You've got a target list. You understand what projects you want to do. You understand what institutions you want to go to, the supervisor, and you know your timelines. And then you need to get in touch with them. So before you even applied, I'd recommend to speak to them. And I think somebody said it earlier in the chat as they were going. The first thing I would do is send an informal email, but it's formal. Don't just start it with, "Hey up Cocker, how's it going?" Be professional. I'd personally, dear professor, whoever, I wouldn't start with the first name. And I'd be brief. Like I've just said, some of them have got a ridiculous amount of emails and they never read them. So be brief and clear on exactly what you want. Say who you are, say why you're attracted to them, and say what topic and what. Think of some way to attract them. And I think it was at the UK SEDS conference when I was with Tracy, actually. One of the speakers said to do a catchy subject in the email title. And I actually think that's not a bad idea. If you can think of a way for somebody to open that email, not, you've won £1 million like a Nigerian prince. Absolutely. If you get a catchy subject, they might actually open your email, which can be a challenge in itself. Or even if you warn them on Twitter, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you. Do you mind if I send you an email?" Yep, jobs. At least they're going to be looking out for your email. There's some way for them to read it. And then you do an informal meeting. Yes, Tracy, when I put this on there, I did consider putting on my swimming trunks and then standing up at the end of this talk, but I know it's been recorded, so I won't do that. So I had an informal meeting, an online chat with everybody I applied for first. Before I applied, it's still formal, but it was probably a bit more relaxed, except in one case, which I'll talk about in a minute. Be prepared for anything. Some of them were really relaxed. One supervisor I spoke to was just a chat like this. It was really cool. One supervisor, from my initial email, had searched me on LinkedIn, and I knew that because of the questions they asked. So they'd researched me, and they started asking me questions about me. I was, oh my god, how do you know this? You know, you're living in my house. Another one, I said I'd have a meeting thinking I was just going to meet one supervisor. And when the Zoom screen opened up, was 3 professors who then conducted an interview. And I felt like I'd been beat up at the end of it. So I wasn't quite ready for that. But it was still an informal chat. Discussed the research as well. It's important that you understand what projects you're looking at and whether it is suitable and you want to apply for it. But make sure you understand all the detail around it. Well, does the start date suit? I found I'd already signed up for my masters in September. I was partway through it. It was November, December. I was starting to look for PhDs, and people going, "Oh, brilliant! Yeah, you'd be really good. Can you start in February?" No. Oh, well, it's no good to you then. So timelines mattered a lot. What the funding is, how many people you're going to be working with. You know, are you going to be one of 100 PhD researchers who never sees your supervisor? You're going to be one of 2 and really close. What's the entire environment like? Attendance matters as well. I mean, I didn't think that at the time. I thought I'd be in Manchester every day, but at the moment, I don't go every day. I go the days it suits. There's a colleague of mine who actually comes once a month to Manchester. So is that acceptable? And sometimes it is. If you've got caveats, maybe speaking to them and say, you know, I need every Wednesday off because I've got an amazing cat and I just love spending Wednesdays with my cat. Then maybe they'll go with it. And to remember that it's a two-way judgment. Yes, of course, you want to impress them and you want to show them that you're capable, dedicated, keen, intelligent, all the good stuff that you want to tell them. But they have got a niche project that they want somebody to commit 3.5 years of their life to for not a lot of money. The pool probably isn't that big of candidates. There's probably not 1 million people that want to do that. And unless you're at Oxford and you're working for, I don't know, the next Stephen Hawkins, there's probably not 500 people applying. You know, and I was surprised at this. You're probably be lucky if you're in double figures for most applications. Your peer competition is probably 10 at the most, and often a lot less. And you'll see projects coming off the adverts, and then coming back again because only one person might have applied, they might have offered it, and they might have took something else. So understand that they need you, and it's important that they find you to do the work, and it is two-way. It is important that it's two-way. So you know, you've got value as an applicant, and you've done all this work, and you've done loads of research, and you've not even applied yet. So hopefully at this point, you've really narrowed it down. You know where you're going, you know what you want to do, you know who you want to do it with. You spoke to them, you're pretty keen. And actually, what I found, the informal chat where I turned the screen on, there was 3 professors. At the end of the conversation, they effectively said, "Yeah, you're fine, do an application and you're in." So actually, before I even applied, I knew that if I'd applied, I'd get offered the place. Um, for many reasons, I didn't apply. I ended up doing something else, but you know, it can be that informal. Yep, you're sorted. For most of them, you've had this informal chat and they're encouraging you to apply. Yeah, please put your paperwork in. And that's what we're just going to go on now, understanding that I'm probably running over time, but I'll be as hasty as I can. First thing, application is probably a really big part because your interview will be based on it. They don't know anything about you. You've never been there other than a brief chat. They've done some face stalking on LinkedIn and seen you going off about football on Twitter like I do all the time. So your application, every institution is different. There's no standardized form. It's not UCAS. Every institution has their own different form with different things they're asking, but in general, they'll ask similar things. So details and administration. Do you have the right to study in the UK, or can you get a visa, or you know, can you do it? There's nationality checks. What do you want to do, and how are you going to fund it? The second 2 questions could be, I want to work with this person, don't know the project yet, and I've got no money. One of my applications was exactly like that. So you don't have to complete everything because this will actually go to the supervisor through the faculty. So it's not like it's going into a board. It probably includes the supervisor somewhere, so they'll expect it. You'll have to provide proof of what you've said. So you'll say, I've got a degree in dogology, and you'll show your dogology certificates. And then a really important part is your personal statement. And not all of everybody asked for it, but I think some of the ones I did ask for it, at least 2. And say 1,000 words, depending on what they're asked, but they'll normally give you an idea of a length, a limit, and a format, and word, and this type point, and all that kind of stuff. There's normally some guidance, and it's personal statement to sell you to them on this project. Tailor it to your project. Don't write a generic one. Tailor it to that project. Say why you're suitable. define your experience, define why you're the person's going it, particularly if you're changing subjects. I said I was a physicist going into engineering. That was really important, that I defined why I was suitable and go on to that. Probably the most important thing, prove and show that you have a commitment to do this, because they're going to invest time for 3.5 years, and their number one thing will probably be, can this person or will this person actually finish this PhD? It's probably the most important part, is that you're showing you're capable of doing it and staying on it. And then just do basic spelling and grammar checks, which clearly I failed on some of these slides as I've gone along, but you're not an interview board, so I'll get away with it. And discuss extra things as well. And again, this is where I talk about peer competition. If you're competing against less than 10 people, or 5 people in some cases, or less, and their extracurricular activities are, because they're 21 years old, is I was in the university rowing team, and I worked in the local Costco's every Saturday for my undergraduate degree. And you're 40 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, whatever, and you've had a life and you've had a family and you've studied through the Open University, and you've done that alongside, and you've worked your own study skills out, and you've managed things in a project, because a PhD is a project. It's just project management. You've got loads of skills that the traditional student won't have. Sell them. It's important, it's really important that you show you've got these skills, because people do respect that. And then some of them ask for a CV. There's like an academic focus, a broader style you can do it. So instead of talking, I did this job, you can focus more on what you learn or how it goes along. And there's templates on the internet for that, but that can be more generic. I found I was tailoring my CV, and I was writing a new personal statement rather than writing a new CV every time. And then the last part on the application is references, really important. Sorry, Tracy, am I right to go over a bit, or do I need to really get my finger out?
You can talk as long as you like.
Thank you. No, sorry for waking you up there, Trace.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so references, really important and really difficult for a mature student or an OU student. The OU does have a process where you can ask for an academic reference, but effectively it's a statement of your studies. It's really difficult, because of the distance learning, remote nature of study, for them to give a true and accurate reflection on it. You can informally ask your tutor to do it, or your tutor can feed into this generic statement. But again, really difficult. Which tutor, if you've done 10 modules in your degree, which tutor are you going to pick? Really hard for the OU to do it. And particularly if you're older and you've been employed, if they're asking for 2 academic references, well, who are the 2 academic references? Because you're not a traditional student that's got a module tutor and a supervisor, like you would have in an undergraduate. So I ended up speaking to them saying, well, you take 1 academic reference and 1 workplace reference. And everybody was happy with that. Nobody said no. So I had a really good reference from my workplace, where I was good. And I worked on academic reference. And this is the bit that takes time. And this is the bit that I think, if you're considering going down this path, this would be what I would focus on first. And that's by giving enough information to somebody to write on it, and target it, and be honest about it. So I did what I've done on my references. The Space Society, being involved in the Space Society meant I was involved with academics in the Open University. I did some discussions on what was it? Oh, on age access, actually, on calling everything young when it shouldn't be young, it should be early career. So I'd engage with an academic. I did a bit of work, temporary contract for the OU as an engineering group tutor for a 6-week contract because of the pandemic. Did that. So I ended up doing about 6 or 7 things with the Open University with different people. And then I spoke to a senior lecturer who I didn't know well, but I knew. And I said, haha, this is me. Could you possibly write me a reference? And by the way, I did this with this professor, and I did that with that leader, and I did that on this module. And I had 6 or 7 things laid out that these are all the achievements I'd done. Could you put this into a reference? And he emailed all the different people and confirmed I wasn't just bluffing it. And then put it all together and wrote me a really good reference. And I think that's what you have to do as a distance learning student, is think long term, get involved in extra things that somebody can write about. Because if you speak to your tutor, I don't know, 6 times in a 9-month module and they mark 4 assignments, there's probably not a lot they can say about you. And be prepared to chase, because everybody's busy. So chase your references, but think ahead about what your references are going to be, and sell yourself. Sell your abilities and skills beyond what a traditional student has, because you've all got them. You've done that. You've got your application in. They think you are a trabe on earth. Let's get him in for an interview, or her in for an interview. Let's come and speak to them. Different ways of doing it. Some are in person. Some want you to come and speak to them. Some will do it remote via Zoom. And my supervisor now at Manchester, I've actually only physically met once. So you can do things remote, and there'll be multiple supervisors. There'll be your primary supervisor probably, and there might be other people who are involved. There might be an external assessor to make sure they do the process right. There might be co-supervisors that might be involved in you, and some of them might be really informal. Like I said, the one where I had 3 professors, that was actually in my informal chat, and although I said, oh my God, it was horrendous, because I wasn't expecting it. Actually, the chat was pretty relaxed. It wasn't too pressured. I didn't have to prepare anything because I didn't know, so I didn't have time to prepare anything. I didn't have to give a presentation. We just spoke. Pretty cool. But some of them will have a formal question process and they'll go through it. Sometimes you might get a list of questions. So one of the things I applied for, they sent me a list of questions. We're going to ask everybody this. And they were quite generic areas, and then one of them was a very focused one. Here's a challenge, tell me what your answer is, and then you'll go in and you discuss why you've chose what it is. So you might get a really prepared answer, or you might walk in without a clue of what your questions are going to be. You might be asked to do a presentation. You might be asked to do a demonstration. They might ask you to do anything, and everybody's different. Nobody has a standardization. They'll give questions to you. They will want to know your motivation and your preparation. So your motivation, why do you want to do it? Are you able to stay the course? Your preparation, what have you done to understand this project? Do you know what the project's talking about? Do you know the research is correct? And do you have the background knowledge to go on? Not as critical as you think, because you're going to learn on your PhD. So do you have the foundation skills to learn the knowledge they need? And to go back to my academic record, I did a broad physics BSc. And I think that gave me enough skills to then build on. I'm not doing a physics PhD, I'm doing a space engineering one, but I've got the skills to learn on. And questions to you, they'll always come at the end, go, have you got any questions for us? Have some, shows that you're interested, and prepare them, and don't mind digging in. I mean, I was asking questions about, so what's your leave policy? Because if somebody turned around to me and says, we don't do it, we just work every day and we do 80 hours a week, I probably think that's not a place I want to be, because I do love my wife. I like time off as well, more time off than John Wayne safety catch. So absolutely have some questions for them, and don't be afraid of asking questions that matter to you, because it's a long time if you get the answer, if you don't ask them and it's something that's a problem. And if you've got a chance, if it's in person, meet other postgraduate researchers and understand the context of the answers. I went to one place, I sat and they laid on dinner. They were that keen for people to come. They laid on a lovely posh dinner, and PhD students are poor, so they'll all come to a free meal. So I had all the local students. We were sat chatting, and they were answering questions, but for some of them, particularly the later year PhDs, I mean, they were probably just beaten down by the system. It's a tough old road. But I could feel just a bit of negativity, that it was difficult and they probably weren't enjoying the environment. But they're not going to say that. They're not going to sit around and go, oh my God, that supervisor is an absolute nightmare, because that grades their own career, that grows their own environment. So understand the context, but try and understand how it goes. And like I said, competitive process, but for who? It's a competitive process for them to get you as well. They are keen for you and understand that you are a good commodity. Their priorities are probably the commitment and dedication before anything else, because you could be the brightest person in the world, but if they don't think you're going to finish the PhD, they're not going to waste the time offering it. And then do you fit? And you might be a great person and be excellent for one project there, and the same project with the same standards, they say no, because it's just not a fit. It's a different environment, and sometimes that happens. Happens in jobs. And the last, probably out of the 3, the least important is your background knowledge. Are you an expert in the subject? Because you're probably not an expert in the subject. That's what the PhD is for. So showing that you're capable of doing it and that you're dedicated and you stay the course is possibly the most important. And what your priorities are: is it a good environment? Do you get on with your supervisor? And will it get you to where you want to be? Because if it doesn't do any of these things, it's going to be a long 3.5 years. And I'll just talk about the case studies. Informal online chat, like I said. Hello, 3 professors. Didn't expect to speak to you. That was pretty surprising. I had a formal Zoom interview, and before that, they asked me to do a presentation. It was just 5 minutes, talk about the project, talk about your background, and that was pretty straightforward. And then they went through a series of set questions. I had a formal in-person interview where I turned up with no preparation, as in I didn't say to prepare anything, and I was stood in a room. 3 supervisors sat at a desk like a school. They said, "You see that whiteboard behind you? Get that pen and start right there and derive Maxwell's equations." Obviously I started sweating quite a bit and I was under a lot of pressure and I felt terrible. They had to give me hints and nudges. It was probably the most stressed I've felt in my life. I did actually get to the end. I derived some equations, and I think I did really well. But I walked out of that room feeling like the stupidest person in the world because of the structure and the pressure. I thought it was a really terrible interview. They offered me the PhD and I didn't take it, because why would I want to go to somewhere that makes me feel stupid? So how they interview you influences how you feel about going there as well. And I think, you know, it's something to be conscious of. But that was a pretty horrendous afternoon. I'm not going to lie. Get yourself up there writing electromagnetism. So it's all done. You've got it through, and it's offers time. You finish your applications. You start. We're waiting. Right? Who's going to give me an offer? And somebody rejects you. Somebody says, no, you're not suitable. Well, maybe it's not you. Maybe it's not. Maybe they've found somebody who is the Albert Einstein of the field, and they've come in, and you can't change that. Maybe they just didn't. You know, you think they were a bit of an arse. Maybe they thought you were, because sometimes people do. You know, there's an idiot in every group, and if you can't see who it is, it's probably you. It's normally me. So, but if you do get rejected, at least ask the question, why not? Is there anything I could have done? Is there anything that changed? And hopefully they'll give you some idea, because it might help you later. But I believe in you. Offers to study, you're going to get loads. You're going to come and work with us. Come and work with us. And what happens then depends on your funding position. If you have funding with it, well, that's your decision. I'm funded. I've got an offer. Do I take this because that's me choosing where I'm going? But if you haven't got funding, there might be a secondary process where you've got to go through scholarships, or you've got to wait for the university to go through the UKRI funding process. So it might take time, even after they say yes, for you to then say whether it's yes, really, you can come. And they've all got different timelines. So you might get offered one early, and they might say, oh, can you give us an answer? And what I found was everybody that wanted to offer you would send you an email first saying, so if we offered it, would you be mind to accept it? And if you say yes, then they send you a formal offer. And they, I don't think they explicitly say timeline, tell us by this date, but I certainly felt there was a pressure of, oh, we need to know, lines like, it is a competitive process and we fill them based on candidates availability, so please let us know as soon as possible. In other words, if you don't take it, we'll give it to someone else, shit, mate. So they try and put pressure on you. Again, it's about knowing what you want to do. Is it the right place for you? So you might have to go back and say, oh, when I did a Zoom interview, can I come and have a visit? Things like that to make sure it's right for you. Is it the right project? Is it the right supervisor? Is it sustainable for you to get there every day? As I found that my journey's changed. I'm moving because it's just too difficult in time for me to get to where I want it to be. And there's nothing wrong with ranking projects and saying, I'll give you an answer. They know people are applying for more than one. Everybody applies for more than one. They might pretend that you're the greatest person in the world. You might tell them that, oh, I absolutely want to do your project in the interview, but it's probably not true for everybody you're applying to. So rank them and say, here's 4 I've applied for, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I would be happy taking them all. And then make the decision based on what offers you get. So be honest with yourself, because again, it's a big commitment. It's 3.5 years or longer. It's your life, it's your time, it's your money. Absolutely don't do something you don't want to do, because that would be really poor. And if things change, if life changes, if you don't want to go to a location, if you change your mind, if you get a bad feeling about a place, don't be afraid of saying, do you know what? No, it's not for me. I think I'll go somewhere else, thanks. Because it's a huge commitment and they need you. They need you. So sorry, I've got over. I'm 10 minutes over already, and we've not even had questions yet. So my last slide, key takeaways. It's not too early to start prepping. If you're in your first year, if you're just starting and you think this is where I might want to go, start thinking about extra things you can do. Start thinking about preparing for your references. Start getting involved in stuff, not just because it's great and, it's all about me, narcissistic, let me get good CVs, but because being involved in things like the Space Society, or being a STEM ambassador, or helping an outreach, or doing other things is actually really good and a great way to meet people as well. I just wish I had friends rather than being victimized by Tracy every day. And project management skills, they are PhD as a project. So if you can demonstrate project management skills, you're probably on a good road for a PhD. Researching before your application is really important. I probably spent more time on research in the application, researching my research, than I did on the application itself, because you're targeting exactly what you want, and hopefully you can make sure it's the right fit for you, so the application process is easier and you're more likely to be accepted. It's a competition against other people, but it's a competition for you. You're a valuable commodity, and particularly in cost of living crisis and inflation, not many people are going to want to live on not a lot of money for a very long time doing a specific task. So don't think you're against 500 people and you've got to beat the world. That's probably not the case. If you're a mature student, if you're an OU graduate, you are absolutely highly respected. Talk about age, every single interview I had, every discussion I had, informal or formal, with any research group, all mentioned my age. Almost every single one of them was really positive. The only time it was negative, and I wouldn't even say it was negative, was to do with the motivation. Well, you're older, you've got a family and kids. Can you live on a PhD stipend? So it was important that they confirmed that I was sustainable on the project, and we discussed, I didn't give details about my income because none of your business, but we discussed that I thought about this and I considered it. Every single discussion about my age as a 42-year-old applying to do a PhD was actually really positive. Wow, look at the skills you've got. Oh, you've done all these kind of things. Supervisors, 50, 60-year-old professors are dealing with 21-year-old new graduates and treat them like children. And sometimes 21-year-old graduates behave like children. So they've got a really weird relationship. They see you as a guiding hand because they don't want to stand in there holding the hand and looking after them. But they think, oh, if I stick an older, more mature person in there who's dedicated, working hard, isn't playing silly buggers, isn't being a giddy kipper and having like Nerf wars across the office like they've never met me, then they might think, oh, you'll be a really good influence on them. One of the projects I applied for included trips to America. Woohoo, let's go to JPL. And the supervisor told me about the nightmare they'd had with these postgraduate researchers because they'd lose the keys or they'd go out and get hammered again. Woohoo, met me. But they said, oh, I wouldn't have to hold your hand. I wouldn't have to travel over with you. You'd be able to go on your own. Again, crazy business. Don't want to do that. But they didn't know that. They thought I was an older, trustworthy person and would be really good to develop their group. And I could supervise the other PhDs, or at least support them. I wouldn't be supervising them. So it's a really valuable thing. And OU graduates are respected because people understand the work you've put in to get to where you want to be, and that it's been harder for you, and that you've had to do it alongside other things, and that you've got loads of other skills. So don't be afraid of thinking you haven't got them. Don't have imposter syndrome, like Tracy said at the start. Although how do you not have a feeling? Everybody feels things, even me. Normally hunger. But absolutely know that you're valuable. Know that there's places to talk to. As I said right at the start, doing a one-person example of something is probably not the best. So look for wider support. People in the Space Society. There's other people who have going through or have gone through the same process. If you go through the process, share the knowledge. Look for things. So there was a brilliant person in the Royal Astronomical Society Early Careers Network that spent some time doing video calls with me to talk about the process and really helped me. Again, there's other societies, the Institute of Physics, all that kind of stuff. Do some searching. There's PhD forums where people are talking and complaining and discussing ideas. There's websites, there's guidebooks. I mentioned to one earlier for Matt Might, who talked about his illustrated guide to a PhD. So there's loads of different ways of support, and you can do it. You absolutely can do it, because if I can do it and I'm an idiot, you can do it. And that's it. I've finished. And there I've got my email, and I've got my Twitter, and I've got my LinkedIn, and I just want friends, really. So if you ever want to talk to me, if you got any questions, please just give me a shout, and I don't mind spending my time absolutely helping you, and I will. And that's me, Tracy.